Number 10. The Little Mermaid. Disney has massively altered the original grim dark fable by Hans Christian Andersen, published in 1837. In the book, the nameless mermaid enters into a terrible pact. She allows her tongue to be cut out by a sea witch in exchange for legs. The witch ends up getting the Little Mermaid's sweet singing voice in return. Almost like the Disney version, but far worse. Once on land, the act of walking is extremely painful for the Little Mermaid, and the prince sees her as a kind of mute pet. She falls in love with him, but in the end, he marries someone else. The Little Mermaid learns her lesson and dies of a broken heart.
At a number 9 spot, we have Pinocchio. Pinocchio is a story of a wooden doll who is brought to life with the help of his friend Jiminy Cricket. Oh yeah, and if you haven't lived under a rock, you would know that when he lies, his nose gets bigger. Despite being a movie filled with good-hearted acts and heartfelt moments, the original story behind Pinocchio is much darker than that. The original writer, Carlo Collodi, had initially created the story of Pinocchio for Italian newspapers to show kids what would happen to them if they chose to act in any sort of rebellious way. In his iteration of Pinocchio, the doll is portrayed as a rebellious and annoying kid who is constantly being tortured in the story just for being bad. And for his green buddy, Jiminy Cricket, well, he was in the story as well and was giving Pinocchio some good advice, all until Pinocchio got mad and decided to smash him with a mallet. And an even darker twist to the tale, Pinocchio ends up being hung for the bad deeds he has committed. If we all knew about this, maybe the growing nose would not be as famous as it was.
Number 8. Snow White. In Little Snow White, as the original story was called, the evil queen asks the hunter to take Snow White into the forest to kill, as happens also in the movie. In the original version, the child is also only 7 years old, as opposed to Disney's 14-year-old. Neither seems old enough to consider marriage though. In the Grimm version, the queen orders the huntsman to bring back Snow White's internal organs, saying kill her, and as proof that she is dead, bring her lungs and liver back to me. He kills a boar instead and brings back the queen the boar's lungs and liver, which the queen thinks belongs to Snow White and so promptly eats. The cook had to boil them with salt, and the wicked woman ate them, supposing that she had eaten Snow White's lungs and liver. Snow White and the prince fall in love and get married even though Snow is only 7 years old, and the queen attends their wedding where she is met with her punishment of dancing to death. They put on a pair of iron shoes into burning coal, and they were brought forth with tongs and placed before her. She was forced to step into the red hot shoes and dance until she fell down dead.
At number 7 spot, we have The Hunchback of Notre Dame. This beloved Disney movie is set in 15th century Paris and follows the lives of a deformed bell ringer of Notre Dame Cathedral and his love interest La Esmeralda, who is a French Roma girl. This story with two physically appearing polar opposites combines tragedy with love and makes for a pretty good story in the end. But as for the others on this list, don't be deceived by the flashing lights and emotional stories, because its original depiction is one of the worst. The original story by Victor Hugo ends well for absolutely nobody in the movie. See, in the movie where Quasimodo and Frollo both fall in love with Esmeralda, but in Victor's story, Frollo frames Esmeralda for attempted murder and she gets sentenced to death by hanging. In both the movie and original story, Quasimodo beats Frollo, but in the original story, he gets pushed off a building because he's laughing hysterically at Esmeralda being hanged.
Number 6, we have Cinderella. We all know the classic story of Cinderella, but Cinderella doesn't actually have a fairy godmother. Rather, she plants a tree by her mother's grave and prays under it every day. She wears her dress to wear to each ball under the tree, and she's still helped by animals, though specifically birds, not mice. Also, she doesn't just lose her shoe because she's in a rush. The clever prince covers the steps in a pitch to make her stick to them, but she only loses a shoe in the process. One of Cinderella's evil stepsisters cuts off her toe and the other cuts off her heel so they can both fit into the tiny glass slipper. The prince is notified by the little doves that there's blood on the shoe, and he finally discovers the true owner is Cinderella. Once the stepsisters realize that, they try to favor Cinderella. They attend her wedding only to have their eyes pecked out by the little birds.
Right in the hub of our list, we have Pocahontas. This Disney movie portrays Pocahontas as being a free-willed woman whose best friend is a raccoon and her dad is a chief for her native tribe. The English arrive looking for gold and to claim territory, while Pocahontas finds her lover John, trying to bring peace to both sides. Classic native and early settler stuff, you know? And in the end of the movie, Pocahontas decides to stay with her tribe instead of going to England with John. However, the real story behind this is much more differently, so hopefully this doesn't ruin your childhood. In the original story, Pocahontas was never in love with John. In fact, she hated him with her guts because he would lie about everything that happened between the two. As mentioned in the movie, when John asked for Pocahontas to come back with him to England, she declines. But in the original story, John gets taken aback from this rejection, and this would ultimately lead to the Anglo-Powhatan Wars between the settlers of Virginia colony and the Algonquin Indians. Pocahontas would then get kidnapped and forced to indulge in English culture like Christianity and the English language. After a bit of time, she went back to her tribe in Virginia, but got really sick and passed away at the young age of 21. I told you I'd ruin it.
Number 4, Sleeping Beauty. In Gian-Battista Bastille's tale, which is the actual origin of Sleeping Beauty, a king happens to walk by Sleeping Beauty's castle and knocks on the door. When no one answers, he climbs up the ladder through a window and he finds the princess and calls her. But as she's unconscious, she does not wake up. He carries her to the bed and abuses her, then leaves. She awakens after she gives birth because one of her twins sucked the flax from the spindle out of her finger. The king comes back and they end up falling in love. However, the king is still married to someone else. His wife finds out and not only tries to have the twins killed, cooked, and fed to the king, but also tries to burn the princess at stake. Luckily though, she was unsuccessful. Then the king and the princess get married and they live happily ever after.
At our number 3 spot, we have Mulan. Mulan follows a young Chinese woman who looks to extend her boundaries and willingly disguises herself as a man to join the army to prove to her family and to herself that she can do anything she wants. In the war, she ultimately saves her father's life and brings honor to her family. After being told for over 1,500 years, the story has gotten extremely sugar-coated. Now in Hua Mulan's original poem, that which the movie is based on, it had them losing the war completely. The Khan allowed Mulan to live, but only if she lives with him, basically making her his own slave. So in the poem, she's as cunning as in the movie, and upon hearing this, she manages to escape and run back home. When she comes back home, however, she is met with the news that her father had passed away when she was gone and that her mother had remarried. The Khan then sends out men to find her, and as she finds no other solution to this problem, she takes her own life in order to be with her dad.
At number 2, we have Tangled. Tangled, it's a pretty loose adaptation of Rapunzel, but she ends up getting knocked up by the prince before they escape, and the evil sorceress figures it out. The sorceress cuts off Rapunzel's hair and throws her out into the wilderness. When the prince shows up to see her, the sorceress dangles Rapunzel's cut off hair to lure him in and tells him that he'll never see Rapunzel again. He ends up jumping out the window in despair and is blinded by the thorns below. He wanders around aimlessly, and Rapunzel ends up giving birth to twins, and he's eventually guided back to her when he hears her voice. Her tears restore his sight, then they return to the prince's kingdom and live happily ever after.
At our number 1 spot, we have Peter Pan. Peter Pan is about a magical boy who can fly without wings and fight without weapons. He travels from the Enchanted Isle of Neverland and various locations, all while being chased by his arch nemesis Captain Hook. This movie is based on the story of J.M. Barrie. Peter Pan was actually based off of Barry's older brother, David. After an ice skating accident, his older brother David would tragically pass away, so he created Peter to keep the image of his brother alive, and he created the island of Neverland as a place for his brother to go to. This would have a lot of dark implications for the movie because Peter would always want to bring Wendy and her brothers to Neverland, and if Neverland is a place to go after you pass away, he's basically asking them to join him in the afterlife.
Starting off this countdown at number 10, Tag. The opening scene of Tag is one of the most shockingly horrific moments in Japanese cinema, and is a perfect setup for the absolute carnage and confusion that follows. A young girl called Mitsuko finds herself battling between alternate realities, each with a unique set of horrors she must face. There is little to no explanation as the audience gets thrusted into a never-ending spiral of danger alongside Mitsuko, which makes the movie a heart-racing watch. Despite the endless world of horror seen in Tag, it is the true reality revealed at the very end that is the most terrifying. Now, if this movie name sounds familiar, it might be because the movie trended on TikTok around when it came out with the famously terrifying bus scene. We can unfortunately only show a short clip because it's from a movie, but does that scene not just give you goosebumps? Like, holy, talk about intense. Now at number 9, The Ghost of the Hunchback. Hajime Sato's 1965 Toei movie Hayden Samushi Atoko goes by several names in the West: The Ghost of the Hunchback, House of Terrors, and Satan's Pit. Regardless, they are all the same terrifying movie. The Ghost of the Hunchback is about a hunchbacked caretaker who presides over a forlorn mansion inhabited by the ghost of his previous masters. An unbelieving trio, a doctor, his assistant, and his niece, fail to heed the caretaker's warnings and are slaughtered horribly by the jealous occupants. Now moving on to number 8, The Curse. Fans of the found footage style horror need to look no further than Nori or The Curse. The film opens with an introduction to paranormal investigator Masafumi Kobayashi, who has disappeared during the process of making a documentary titled The Curse. The documentary then begins to play as viewers are left to uncover the secrets he left behind. Seemingly disconnected mysteries that involve strange and creepy events are tied together by the discovery of an old ritual that summons a demon named Kagutaba. Noroi is said to be disturbingly realistic, which makes it all the more terrifying. I found out the movie is free to watch on YouTube, but that's if you dare to watch this horrifying film. But it can also be found with better quality on Shudder. Now at number 7, House. The bizarre horror that is House is a hyperactive fever dream that takes place in the most deranged, creepy, haunted house to ever grace the big screen. Nobuhiko Obayashi's twisted fairy tale tells the story of 7 schoolgirls on a summer trip to an aunt's remote estate. The fantasy-like beginning takes a turn so deformed and uncanny that it's difficult to adequately describe. House is overflown with unbelievable scenes, people say. The scenes that take place in the haunted house are as gruesome, but they are just as exciting to watch. The movie came out in 1977. And nowadays, watching older horror movies don't really seem that scary because of all the CGI and everything we have now, but after seeing a 5-second clip of this movie, you're sure to have goosebumps. This movie is one of the most inventive and colorful horror movies to ever exist and truly must be seen to be believed. Now at number 6, Sadeko vs. Keiko. Yes, the vengeful ghosts of Ring and The Grudge are iconic. But if you've ever wondered which ghost is stronger, well, here's a movie that brings them together for the ultimate face-off and answers just that. We follow Natsumi, a woman who watches Sadeko's cursed videotape and realizes it's only a matter of time before Sadeko kills her. She tries to save herself by pinning Sadeko against Keiko, a malevolent spirit who resides in a haunted house, hoping they would kill each other and end the curse. The film takes the best parts of the two movies' antagonists and blends them together, capturing the dread and hostility perfectly. And funny enough, the movie seems very similar to Ring. Well, based on the trailer, that is, because I haven't seen the movie, but after seeing the spooky trailer, I might just have to give it a watch. It's creepy and fun and totally worth the watch, and the movie can be found on Amazon Prime, YouTube, and Shudder. Halfway at number 5, Uzumaki. Based on the horror mangaka Junji Ito's spine-chilling manga of the same name, this film's concept is just as eccentric as it is creepy. It's about a cursed town whose inhabitants are haunted by ominous spirals that drive the townspeople mad, and sometimes to the point where they take their own life. Our protagonists race to break the curse, but can it really be stopped? The strengths here are the ghastly body horror, the lack of standard backstory, lending to the sense of hopelessness, and the nightmarish, surreal imagery. A man crawls into a washing machine, people turn into snails, and your fingertips have spirals. Even the sky is cursed with spiral-like clouds. This is certainly not a town I'd personally want to live in, and based on the trailer, it looks very freaky and cryptic looking. At number 4, Dark Water. This is a classic that forever remains underrated and one of people's personal favorites. Yoshimi is a single mother in the midst of a divorce. To prove she is able to take care of her daughter, she moves the pair into an old rundown apartment building, where the haunting horrors begin. A dripping leak forms on the ceiling, black here appears in the tap water, and an extremely creepy child ghost. It's chilling with a touching mother-daughter relationship at its heart, but don't let that fool you because this movie is truly terrifying. And fun fact, this is based on a novel by Koju Suzuki, who is also the author of the Ring novels, and was directed by Haido Nakata, who also directed the unbelievably famous and scary movie Ring. Some even say it's Japan's saddest horror movie. Here at number 3, Corpse Party. The movie Corpse Party is based on the horror video game series of the same name. There's also an anime and manga too. It's set in a haunted school and is incredibly dark and blood-curdling, which is right up the alley for most big horror fans. It has everything: blood, gore, mystery, and ghosts. A group of high school students perform a charm called Sachiko Ever After to ensure they'll remain friends forever. Instead, they find themselves transported to a haunted elementary school with resentful spirits, and Sachiko herself, who's actually the psychopathic ghost of a little girl in a red dress. There's also an equally freaky sequel called Corpse Party Book of Shadows. Now coming in at number 2, Ring-You. Ring-You is a cult horror film of legendary status. Its prominence as one of the best horror films to come from Japan has not wavered over for more than 2 decades since its release. Ring-You subjects viewers to a deep-seated psychological attack that leaves them with a mysterious and lasting sense of doom. The story itself is deceptively unassuming. Watch a cursed videotape and die a gruesome death 7 days later. It's a masterful way director Hideo Nakata cloaks Ring-You in growing dread that makes it a superior film. The frightening jump cuts become implanted in your mind, and the metallic screeching will ring in your ears for days after watching. Of course, this one is good, but for me, I really like the newer remakes of Ring, but still, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend this one. Now coming in at number 1, The Grudge. It's impossible to talk about Japanese horror movies without mentioning Ju-on or The Grudge. The movie is disconnecting thanks to its non-linear narrative, but viewers can expect to encounter 2 terrifying, restless spirits ready to torment anyone that enters their home. Everything about the film is sure to inflict sheer terror. The Grudge draws on horrors from both the real and paranormal, since the terrible crimes committed become the cause of the restlessly horrifying supernatural events. The creeping sense of a foreboding that builds throughout the movie lingers well after watching. I chose to put this at number 1 because I'm a big horror fan, but most horror movies don't actually scare me. But this one actually kept me up at night. I swear all I could hear when I tried to fall asleep was that creepy noise.
At number 10 spot, we have Scream in 1996. At a time when the slasher genre was dying, Scream came in and completely 180'd the way we look at slasher films. I mean, in the beginning of the film, we believe that Drew Barrymore was the main protagonist of the film, but then in the next few minutes, we begin to see that it's simply not the case. As mentioned, they weren't like any other horror films at the time. It was one of the first times where we gained the concept of 2 killers instead of 1, and despite being horrific and scary in some parts, it showed lots of self-parody. The movie poked fun at a lot of the ongoing and repetitive actions done in previous horror and slasher films, but they did it without going over the top, and it was just perfect. On top of that, Ghostface as a villain was very unique to many viewers. Opposed to the other overpowered villains who don't seem to put any effort to killing, Ghostface was fast, but he was also very clumsy, almost showing that he's desperate to capture his victims. Basically, Scream saved the horror genre when it was in the trenches in the 90s, so this film will always remain iconic. At number 9 spot, we have Paranormal Activity. Whether you think about it now, Paranormal Activity belongs on the Mount Rushmore of all horror movies. When this movie first came out, everyone and their mother knew about it. It was such a hit, it ended up totaling around $193 million at the box office with only a $15,000 budget. After its release in 2007, everyone witnessed a new type of horror in the movie realm. Something that almost looked real and something that made us wonder if these paranormal events could happen to us. If you haven't watched the movie, it follows a young couple and their experiences into moving to a new home in San Diego. After only a few days, Katie believes an evil spirit that has haunted her in the past is now back in her new home. So the husband sets up these infamous cameras around the house to record the paranormal activity, and the rest is history. Number 8, The Conjuring. The true story of The Conjuring begins with the first film, which focuses on the Perron family. In January 1971, the Perron family moved into a 14-house farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, where Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters began to notice strange things happening almost immediately after they moved in. It started small. Caroline would notice that the broom went missing or seemed to have moved from place to place on its own. She would hear the sound of something scraping against the kettle in the kitchen when no one was there. The girls began to notice spirits wandering around the house, though for the most part they were harmless. There were a few, however, that were very angry, and this movie showcased all of that. At number 7 spot, we have The Grudge. This sound is the last thing you want to hear before encountering the enraged spirit known as The Grudge. The movie is very well known globally, with different iterations in both Japanese and English. The Japanese one was named Ju-on, The Grudge, and was released in 2002. Then 2 years later, on in 2004, The Grudge was Americanized and released all over theaters in North America. Despite some backlash, it would go on to gross $187 million from only a $10 million budget. And although many argue that the Japanese one was better, I personally believe that both have their top spots in the horror genre. Everything about the film is sure to inflict sheer terror. The Grudge draws on horrors from both the real and paranormal. The Grudge is essentially a cursed spirit who is usually someone who passed away from something very tragic, causing them to come back and haunt others. So go check out this movie if you haven't. Number 6 spot, we have Nightmare on Elm Street. On to another slasher film, we have the 1984 version of Nightmare on Elm Street, directed by Wes Craven. It was the first time when we didn't feel safe in our own dreams because Freddy Krueger could just be there waiting for us. Craven also put his own little twist into this film, which made it his own. Instead of having a big muscular silent guy in a mask, he created a smaller chatty villain instead. Instead of having everyone believe nightmares were a normal, natural thing, he wanted us to believe that something worse awaits us there. Other than that, Freddy Krueger was an amazing villain. He was both brutal and gory with completely burned flesh. And the more you fear him, the higher chances he'll be waiting for you in your dreams. Although his motives were unclear, he had a very good time doing his horrific acts. You can call him a showman in a way. A very notable scene is the first bedroom murder scene. After watching it, you'll just be sitting there in complete disbelief. In the Humber list, we have Halloween. Halloween came at a good time in 1978 following the slasher hype from Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas. What is most notable about Halloween is the main villain, Michael Myers. And he kills a lot in this movie. And when I mean a lot, I mean a lot. This movie brought violence to the front door of all those who were even slightly interested in horror movies. This movie was well feared from young boys and girls, as Halloween was a time where they were granted more freedom than usual. Except when they believe all things are good, everything changes in the matter of seconds once Michael Myers arrives. He is relentless, almost looking superhuman in many scenes. It seems that nothing can stop him, making him one of the most feared villains of all time. Imagine doing everything to stop someone and they're just walking through it all. Yup, that's Michael Myers. Number 4 spot, we have It. Everyone's favorite dancing clown is back. This movie was the sole reason for many people developing a phobia towards clowns, and if you watch the original films, then you would see why. Although it's listed as a TV miniseries, we're going to label it as a movie for the sake of the video. Many people have seen the recent adaptations of It, so the story is pretty much well known, except the 1990 version had many things that the 2017 version didn't have. First of all, they didn't have Tim Curry. His superb acting taught everyone to never talk to strangers, or might I say, clowns. His version of Pennywise doesn't appear to be outright bad from a distance, but then he'll do some unexpected things to catch the kids and even us the viewers off guard. This would make sense because it would actually give more reason for Georgie trusting the clown in the sewer in the first place. His Pennywise wanted to psychologically abuse you until he went on for the final kill, and let alone some of the scenes in this movie were downright unexpected. Number 3 spot, we have Child's Play. We really never thought dolls could look scary before we had Chucky. Chucky is a murderous doll who was previously a real serial killer that transferred his soul into this doll. As a doll, he tries to act innocent, but behind the scenes, he's a psychotic monster waiting for his right time to strike. I guess another reason why Chucky is feared by many is that he's just a doll. Everyone has a doll, so this made everyone believe their doll would come to life and just go on a sudden killing spree. And though Chucky has cartoonish features, he feels unexpectedly human. In the end of the movie, we also see a burnt Chucky, which is even more terrifying for those who watch. Seeing him run around after all these different characters. Number 2, Friday the 13th. Just like the other slasher films I mentioned on this list, Friday the 13th was another one of those films to propel the genre to new limits. This movie took violence and took it up a notch during a time when no other movie dared to. Other than that, it's completely shaked up the teenage population as the murders all took place within a small campground. Apart from this, many believe that the movie is overrated, and although it does have a lot of low quality production and subpar acting, we have to remember this was released in 1980. Jason Voorhees as the main antagonist was the spotlight. He was a silent killing machine, only wielding a machete and the iconic hockey mask. It's believed he has taken the lives of over 200 people over the years of his killing spree, and although he is human, he shows the craziest amounts of tolerance towards pain, and it doesn't seem like anyone stops him from getting to his goals. Who would you rather have running at you? Jason, Freddy Krueger, or Michael Myers? Pick your poison. At number 1 spot, we have The Last Exorcism. The Last Exorcism, which was released in 2010 and directed by Daniel Stamp, is one of the most iconic demonic possession movies of all time. This movie is about a religious minister who is struggling both financially and mentally. So he decided to shoot a documentary to expose the fraud within his own ministry. Except what he finds is something a lot more real than that. This is when he decides to help a fellow follower named Louis Sweetser who believed his daughter was possessed. When they arrived, she really was possessed and shit hits the fan really quickly. The demon that is present in the movie is Abalam. These are the top 10 most iconic horror movie villains of all time. What do you guys think about this list? Leave a comment down below which villain is your favorite, and also which movie is your favorite out of this whole list. I'm your host Andrew, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.